Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Dave and Josh show. How you doing today, Dave?
Great, man. I was on Twitter and I read something funny, man. It was Trump, and he said he believes that he can cut the corona case till like Easter.
Yeah, he makes some wild claims, but I don't think it's going to be very beneficial for his re-election campaign. Because at the end of the day, when you see some of these beaches in Florida when it's completely packed, you just know that the naivety of the U.S. citizens is what's going to screw them over. And the
For sure,
and the
man.
Europeans, to be honest, the Europeans are really in trouble as well.
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
but
But what?
what
I
was I gonna say? Oh, I remember someone said, I think it was you actually said this yesterday or something. You said this could be the downfall of the American, and could be the switch over to
Yeah,
the Americans being the superpower to China becoming the superpower of the world.
kind of makes sense though. If you look back at you look back at history and you can see that the superpowers usually change roughly every 100 years. So it kind of makes sense that roughly around now the superpower would change hands. So I really wouldn't be surprised to see China actually kind of end up on top here. They already account for a third of the world's economy. And the fact is, they're going to deal with the coronavirus situation much better than Europe and the US because of the sheer power that they have over the people.
I feel like also we sort of lived through what the Cold War went through, if that makes any sense. As in, like, America and Russia, they were fighting over
Hmm.
who was going to be the next superpower, and now we already saw that with China and America. And I just find it interesting that, like, it's something that keeps on coming up. That history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Yeah. So it would definitely be interesting. But at the end of the day, the US military is far superior to any other military in the world currently. But you never know. There's a lot of stuff going on behind closed doors that I'm sure we will never, ever find out. So,
Yeah, for sure.
dude, but going back to what Trump was saying, like some of the stuff that he puts on his Twitter, you do kind of wonder what kind of stuff he might be taking.
Man, he's on a lot of blow.
Mm,
Like, he's a businessman, right? So that's like the rich man's drug.
yeah, true, but he's not really as
But
successful. And you've heard the statistic. Just like if he just put his dad's money into the S&P 500 and just stuck his finger in his asshole for literally his entire life, he would be more wealthy than he is now. It'd be like twice as wealthy. It's crazy. Oh.
I could have shut his mouth up too.
But yeah, brings us on to today's question, and one that we've previously disagreed on quite heavily about whether all drugs should be legal. So tell the
Yeah.
viewers what you think, Dave.
Look, man, all drugs should be legal. I'm for it,
Hmm.
and I don't care if you're not for it. But I just see more good in legalizing all these drugs. First of all, if you legalize all these drugs, you eliminate a black market and all the criminal networks. Like, a lot of people can say, sure, you can decriminalize your drugs, but at the end of the day, the drugs that you're buying from are still the same Mexican cartels that show up to people's house and chop their arm off. But once you actually put it into light and actually make it legal, you can actually wipe that all out.
Yeah, true. I definitely agree that eliminating the illegal black market and kind of the criminal networks associated with the trade would be a good thing. I think you'd have to be careful about the way that that's eliminated because if you think about it from the point of view, if the pharmaceutical companies get a hold of those kind of licenses to produce and manufacture those drugs, then I don't think it'll be as beneficial. I reckon the government actually has to be there to moderate it itself personally because pharmaceutical companies are very profit orientated.
Yeah, for sure. I agree that it should be more on the public sector, because once you put it in a private sector, that's where it can go wrong, right? Like,
Hmm.
you can start having price wars, for examples, or it could be all about quality. And, honestly, like, making Coke too pure can actually be pretty bad. I remember I read this one case that there was this one shipment that was shipped to London.
Hmm.
And because most Coke in London is actually cut up with, like, glass
Yeah,
or,
it's cut with glass
steel or
usually. Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, that this shipment was so pure that people started ODing. because they weren't used to how pure it was.
Yeah, true. I mean, it's definitely safe to say that on the streets, a lot of the drugs, the contents of these drugs are very unknown.
Yeah, and that brings me to my second point to why all drugs should be legal. You know, once, if, especially if it's in the public
Hmm.
sector, you can really regulate what goes into these drugs. You can also control the amount someone can buy
Hmm.
within, I don't know, a day or a week or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
I get that that can be controlled, but the issue is, I think some drugs definitely perhaps should be legalized. Like we live in the Netherlands where marijuana isn't legalized, but is tolerated, and you're able to buy and smoke it as you please, really. But the issue is that when you legalize something, the actual use of it spikes heavily. So I remember reading a really good article basically saying that the US has like up to around, I think it was around 20 million alcoholics, but they've only got around 6 million illegal drug addicts. So if illegal drugs were easy to obtain, obviously the figure would rise because it's not such a taboo thing anymore to be using it. A lot of people see the law as, well, it's the law. So they're not going to step over that line if there's a line there in place.
But what if we look at it from a different
Okay.
perspective? So I'm going to use the Netherlands as an
Mhm.
example. So the recreational use of cannabis is legal in the Netherlands, right? And we know the sale and purchase of cannabis is legal, but except the production. But even though recreational use is completely legal, the Netherlands, only like 8% of its population actually smokes weed. It's And why is that? I think it's because it's not taboo anymore. That people think, well, it's a joint, you know, and they'll look at it as a cigarette. Do you know? Like, not everyone smokes
True.
cigarettes. Not everyone drinks, right? And yeah, if all of these drugs are legal, yes, people can still overuse them and they can still harm themselves. But look, we live in a free society. You get to choose what you want to put in your body. That's your choice. And although yes, there are some negative effects on that person's body, it doesn't impact the entire society. And I'm basing this on this guy called Jeffrey
Mhm.
Myron. He's like this American economist, and he argues that not it's the increase of drugs won't. There's actually evidence that shows that there is not a large increase of the use of drugs if they were to legalize
Okay,
them.
I do kind
Look at Portugal.
yeah, I do kind of
They decriminalized all these drugs, and it's got the lowest drug
it's
consumption in Europe.
interesting though how you're viewing it from the actual person yourselves. And I agree that everyone should have their own personal freedom to a point. The point that it starts to harm others is when I think that that should be eradicated. I don't think that personal freedom should allow you to harm other people's lives. And actually, it's pretty commonly known that drugs can break apart a lot of families and basically impact a lot of people surrounding that drug user. I mean, you think about Colorado. So Colorado actually legalized weed. I think it was in 2014, around then, and
Mm.
like
Yeah.
the traffic deaths related to marijuana actually increased by 50% in the following years.
Hmm.
So like in the next year after legalizing marijuana, a 50% increase in marijuana related traffic deaths, which is pretty heavy. And those people aren't
But what if
related to the drug user even. They're just a victim of this drug.
you see that that's the issue, that like people are, this is where people do stupid things. You see this also
Mhm.
with alcohol, where you don't drink and drive, but people
Yeah.
still do that. But what if you put a good system in place where you make a little law saying, look, you can use all these drugs, but there are certain areas that you're not allowed to do it, and there's other areas that you can do it. A good example I have is in Denmark. They have something called heroin
Mhm.
clinics, and it's it's the only place in Denmark where you're allowed to take heroin, and it's but what they do is they give you clean needles. They give you a room to do the heroin in, and when you're doing the heroin, um, there's someone that's actually
Mhm.
near you. So if, let's say, you were to OD, they are perfectly trained. They know how to get you out of it. So what if you put a better system in place and you make it a lot more stricter? And yes, some people will still drink and drive. It still happens, but I look at it from more of a societal point of view, and it may sound harsh, but that percentage is actually quite small compared to
Okay.
the rest
I
of
do see what you're
society.
saying, but funny enough, I read something that is completely the other way. So in Switzerland, in Zurich, there's a park, and I can tell you now, I'm going to screw the pronunciation of this. Platzspitz Park, right? And so during the 1980s, heroin
Okay.
addicts were allowed to frequently gather in the park, and it would stop them regrouping elsewhere. They were given, police were not allowed to enter the park or make any arrests, and clean needles were given out to the addicts. But this once beautiful garden actually got destroyed because there was needles everywhere. Even though they were clean needles and then they were used, the needles were just left. People don't clean up after themselves. And so giving a set space means that you're going to have to somehow pay someone to clean that up. And don't get me wrong, I agree with you that drugs will probably, if they're legalized, will create a vast amount of tax revenue. But money doesn't
Mm.
solve all problems. Like, so if you legalize drugs, it would likely result in an overwhelming need for rehabilitation centers, right? That's pretty, like, the
Sure.
fact that so many people might have to be
But
using
then,
those rehabilitation centers, you screw up the economy inadvertently, as they're not actually going out to work. They're in a rehabilitation center.
okay, but the thing with these rehab centers is I feel like they do it probably wrong because I the thing with drug addicts is people it's still taboo topic. If you're a drug addict, you are looked down upon, and really you should be looking at them in a more humane
Okay.
way. You know, because when we view drug addicts, we see a drug addict. We don't see a person. And yeah, doing drugs is immoral, but the way we treat addicts is also immoral. In Thailand, they have these
Mm-hmm.
rehab centers where they get these drug addicts and they basically force them to puke or something along those lines. It's
Yes.
it's not necessarily the greatest rehab center. I saw it somewhere on Vice, and maybe if we change the way we view drugs, we will change the way we view addicts, which can lead us to actually having better programs that actually work. Like with alcoholics.
Okay, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here, and I get what you're saying, but okay, so we're gonna see this the other way. You get new rehabilitation centers. It's all clean. It's all really well viewed. It's not seen as a taboo thing anymore. Okay,
Yeah.
effectively what you're saying by doing that is that you're opening the doors for individuals who are older than 18, but I mean, you still know there's probably people under 18 that smoke tobacco and drink alcohol, but you're basically opening theoretically the doors for individuals older than 18 to abuse heroin, methamphetamines, cocaine, like all these harder drugs. You're saying, look, you're welcome to do this, and there's a solution to it as well.
Sure.
So
Okay.
it's an interesting way of seeing it.
Okay, I see what you mean. But then I ask, what other way do we have? I mean, obviously, the war on drugs does not work. You search up war on drugs, almost every piece of article you see is just CNN or New York Times just scrutinizing how America just spends so much fucking money on trying to ensure that no drugs come into the country. Yet the country has an opioid crisis. There's even a meth crisis going on somewhere in
Hmm.
California, Fresno, or something. They've got a bad meth problem there.
Yeah, I mean,
So what other way is there? I guess maybe seeing it from the Dutch perspective of like being able to talk more about it and being more open about it and actually accepting it more, you can normalize the use of drugs, and which can lead to like drugs not being like it doesn't look as
yeah, I
special.
know what you mean. But I mean,
You
it's
know?
just like when drugs are legalized, though, it's just the group that originally saw drugs as a bad thing, they no longer see this downside to abusing these formerly illegal drugs. And these drugs, at the end of the day,
Mm,
are addictive. There's a reason that they are
mm,
illegal and they are extremely addictive. So if they become seriously addicted to more or one substances, you're going to see so many different impacts. Like on the surface, legalizing drugs might seem like a way that we could end all our suffering, end all the drug gangs like you spoke about just now. But realistically, I just believe that it would probably increase the number of addicts because at the end of the day, there's a reason people get addicted to this stuff. I mean, just look at smoking and alcohol. There's a lot of addicts for both. it would cause immeasurable financial burdens, because I know it might bring in a lot of tax
Mm.
revenue, but there's going to be a lot of people who stop going to work, a lot of people who, all these rehabilitation centers will need to be built. People need to be hired to work in those rehabilitation
Mm.
centers. And it's just also going to cause unimaginable human like devastation in families. So it's an interesting way.
I think you mentioned this earlier that it does. At the end of the day, if you want to legalize drugs, you have to be sure on which drugs you're legalizing. And maybe you're right. Like in the sense with heroin, for example,
Hmm.
you it'd probably be better to keep that decriminalized rather than legalized. I would say. Um, but I can see mushrooms, LSD, maybe even ketamine as being legalized because if there's a lot of research going into them, and they actually found that shrooms and LSD or ketamine can actually be used medicinally, and that's what I feel. What I feel like you should push for when you legalize drugs is that you move it from a recreational view to more a medicinal view on them. So rather than looking at shrooms and LSD to say, "Hey boys, come to my house, let's get fucked up," it's more like I'm on LSD now because I'm going through depression.
Okay,
You
so
know,
you're saying more that it would be better to have it on a prescription basis?
um, I would say if you legalize it, yeah. You first let it be recreational, obviously, but once it's actually really ingrained into society, I think you can. If you do more research on them, you can see medicinal sides to them. You can push them towards uh like prescriptions
Yeah, to
like
prescriptions
you
to the
said, like
drugs. Yeah, I can see what you mean. But I mean, at the end of
yeah.
the day, I think although both of us make pretty valid points, as as I just genuinely believe, is I think there's so many different angles that you can come at it. It depends how the government deals with it, and it also just depends on
Mm,
yeah. There's too many factors that actually depends on how people view
yeah, true.
drugs is so different in different regions. Whether you're rich, whether you're poor, like is so different for everyone that there's no one fits all solution. One size fits
Hmm.
all.
I guess the only way to actually make this work is to have like a small cult. You know, it's I think it's easier to legalize all drugs if you have a small group of people or you're from a small, very small country because it's just a lot easier to
Yeah, I
regulate,
agree.
right? But if other people disagree or agree, we'd like to hear your opinions in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this convo, please like and share and subscribe, and we'll catch you with more content. You.
Bye for now.